This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Okay, guys. Hi. Turn up my microphone. It is Wednesday night, and I promised you a... Why is my camera so high? I promised you a bonus mini crime story, and I have it. I was like, I'm not going to have time. I just recorded with Brandon. Sorry, I'm trying to fix my computer. I just recorded with Brandon. I had... today's been busy, basically. And so I was like, oh, I'm just not going to have time because I still have to edit a podcast for Joe's daughter. And so it's been busy, but nobody cares about that. So I have a mini crime story. I'll be honest. It's 5:30. Mark wanted to have a what he called a good old fashioned kebab off tonight. He bought these like new kebab sticks, they're like skewers, and is very excited to have a kebab off. So I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'm going to participate, I guess. So he may walk in during this and the dogs will go crazy and so on and so forth. This is your warning. But this story today, and it is a mini one. I think it's going to be pretty short, but it is fascinating. I'm really intrigued by it. So I know with the bonus episodes, I usually do like let me catch you up on life and everything that's going on with me. But I'm not going to do that. We're just going to get right into the story, and maybe save that, well, for another day. Shall we? Okay. Sorry if I seem frazzled. I feel like I've been running around today and whatnot. Okay. Whew. So today we are going to be talking about somebody named Blair Adams, a man. Guys, sorry, I have cat hair stuck to my lips and it's not pleasant. Sorry, I had to cough, so I paused. So we're going to be talking about, his full name is Robert Dennis Blair Adams, and he was born December 28th, 1964. He is from Surrey, British Columbia in Canada. And his most recent job at the time when our story takes place, which is 1996 is when our story takes place. So he's 31. And his most recent job was a construction foreman for his stepfather's company. In late 1995, he returned home to Canada from a construction project in Frankfurt, Germany, where he also apparently met a girlfriend or someone that he was dating. I don't know if they were necessarily girlfriend, boyfriend, but they were dating. So this woman who he was dating described him as a real gentleman. But another colleague of his from Germany described him as abrasive and confrontational and someone who occasionally got into fights. So they're two pretty different descriptions of him. But by most accounts, most accounts that I could find, most people that knew him, he was described as cheerful and hardworking. But in mid-1996, when our story takes place, his friends and family were noticing some changes, and they weren't good changes. He was having some pretty extreme mood swings and lots of insomnia. His behavior was just peculiar, and it kept getting more and more peculiar. So a few things that kind of contributed to everyone thinking that he was acting strangely was that he had battled alcoholism in his past, but he was 2 years sober at this point. And up until this point, he had been really good about attending AA meetings and making his sobriety a priority. But he had recently stopped attending AA meetings. He began leaving his construction site where he was working, and he was the foreman of it, unlocked, which is, that's that's not the standard security practice. And he'd been doing this a long time. It wasn't like he was new. And he was like, "Oh, I just forgot one time." No, he just kind of intentionally was leaving it open, which was very strange. And then he abruptly resigned from his job. He didn't get his last paycheck. And he said to a colleague that he didn't know if he could carry on here. Um, he also confided in his German girlfriend or woman he was dating that he was very apprehensive about potential violence from former coworkers of his from Germany who had recently returned to Canada. So he thought that they were going to do something violent to him. He also mentioned to his mother that someone was spreading rumors about him, but he did not give her any additional details. And by early July 1996, he was pretty convinced that his life was in danger, and he actually told some of his friends that someone was going to kill him. And it just gets weirder. So on July 5th, 1996, Blair withdrew his entire life savings and emptied his safe deposit box and collected basically over $6,000 in cash, along with a lot of jewelry, gold, and platinum. That was his. He didn't like go collect it from other people. It came out of his safe deposit box. And he told his mom that something is bothering him and he's going to take a spur of the moment trip to Courtney, British Columbia, to visit his uncle, but his uncle wasn't home. So the next day, I believe, a day or two later, it was a Sunday morning. He's driving his Chevrolet Chevette, and he tries to cross into the United States by trying to drive it onto a ferry that went from Victoria, British Columbia to Seattle, Washington. But because he had a ton of cash on him, um, he was flagged as being, suspicious. And when they asked him if he had any previous drug or alcohol convictions, he said no. And then they found out that's not true. He was lying. He did have a previous drug. He had a previous drug and assault charge, actually. And so they flagged him as a possible drug courier and they denied him entry. So since he couldn't cross over the border, he went and visited a girlfriend in Vancouver. And then he went and visited a friend in New Westminster and then spent a little bit of time with his mom, Sandra, in Surrey, where she lived and he lived. It was really hard for me to figure out the timeline of this, but at some point in these days, so the first week ish, first to second week in July is when our story takes place. He went to a travel service, paid $1,700 in Canadian money for a round trip flight to Frankfurt. And then he went back and requested a refund the same day and told the travel service the person he was going to visit was actually sick. Well, his girlfriend wasn't expecting him. No one was expecting him in Frankfurt. So it was very strange. And then on Monday, July 8th, so on Sunday, he went to visit his uncle, then went and visited with other friends. And then maybe on that same day, tried to buy this plane ticket. Again, not super clear on that timeline. But on the morning of Monday, July 8th, he packed his bags and told his mom he was leaving and didn't say much else. And that was it. He left her house. On July 9th, Canadian Border Patrol officers found Blair attempting again to cross the border, but this time on foot at the Pacific Highway border crossing. And they noticed he had some scratches on his hands and his legs. And these scratches matched him. And then also these scratches matched the description of a suspect that they were looking for that had been involved in a nearby car theft situation. So the vehicle had been discovered abandoned near the Pacific Highway border crossing. Hold on one second. Sorry, guys. Jim just texted me. Hold on. Yes, it is above. I sent at 11 a.m. today. Sorry, I know this is unprofessional. I should have paused. Okay. Sorry about that. Um, so he matched the description of somebody who was involved in a car theft that they were looking for. They had found the car, but they were still looking for the person who supposedly stole it. And Blair kind of looked like the guy and the guy was described as having scratches on his hands and legs. And so Blair did as well. So they thought, you know, maybe this is the guy and he's trying to cross the border on foot. He just seemed suspicious and this seemed to make sense. But ultimately, they didn't have any real evidence to hold him. So he was released. On July 10th, 1996, he rented he like forgave, no, he got rid of or left his Chevrolet Chevette and he rented a Nissan Altima from the Vancouver International Airport. And he finally, on this third attempt, successfully entered the US by car. Hey guys, I have to keep pausing because I don't want to cough into the microphone. I'm still just a little bit recovering from the whatever I had. Um, so this is his third try getting into the US from Canada, and he did it. He finally did it. He rented a Nissan Altima at the Vancouver International Airport, was able to finally cross over the border. He arrived in Seattle. And again, I did see some accounts that said once he was in Seattle, that's where he purchased the round trip ticket to Frankfurt. But everywhere that I found this little snippet of information said that he spent 1,700 in Canadian cash. So I'm not sure why it would be in Canadian cash if he's in Seattle. So it does make more sense that it probably happened, 2 days ago, 3 days ago. Um, but either way, he got to Seattle. Some accounts said he tried to purchase a ticket to Frankfurt, but he did not board that flight. He didn't ask for a refund, nothing. He bought the ticket. And I guess both of these could have happened. There's a lot of things up in the air here. But he arrived in Seattle, possibly purchased a round trip ticket to Germany, and never got on that flight. And instead, he exchanged it for a one-way flight to Washington, D.C., which was more expensive than a round trip ticket. So none of this is really making sense to, well, me and to anyone involved in the situation either. But he did get on the flight, the one way flight to DC. And once he arrived, he rented a Toyota Camry at Dulles Airport. And at 6:45 a.m., this is on July 10th, he began driving south. So later that morning, he's on Route 250 in Virginia. He apparently backed his car into another motorist's car, caused a little bit of minor damage. And once later on, when they find this driver and talk to him, uh, the driver, all he really has to say is he seemed really nice. Blair seemed really nice, but he would seemed like he was in a hurry, a big hurry. That was it. Not a ton of information. Later that evening on July 10th, Blair arrives in Knoxville. Well, he's kind of between Knoxville and Strawberry Plains. He's about 500 miles southwest of Washington, D.C. And he goes to a BP gas station. And he goes inside and he tells the attendant that he's having trouble with his car key and he either can't get his car to start or he can't get in the car at all. Like he's locked out and the key won't work. So the attendant at the gas station calls an interstate repair service driver named Gerald Sapp. Gerald Sapp arrives, is like, okay, what's the issue? Let me see if I can help you. And Gerald Sapp quickly realizes that the issue is that Blair is using a key from his previous rental car, the Nissan. He's not using the Toyota Camry's key. And so Gerald says, why don't you look in your pockets and see if see where this key is? And he said, if you drove this thing up here, you got to have another key in your pockets. And Blair wouldn't look. Gerald said that Blair just wouldn't look. Gerald said, I thought he was nuts. He was bound and determined that he had the key he needed for that car. So Blair is insisting that this Toyota key is the correct key, or I'm sorry, this Nissan key is the correct key for the Toyota. And this repair guy is like, no, it's not. You got the car here. You have to have another key. And Blair's like, no, this is the key. He's like insistent. He thought Blair's behavior was really odd. But nonetheless, he said, okay, and ended up towing the car to a repair shop until the next day when the rental company could be contacted. They were closed at this point and get a new key made. Then Blair was taken by, I'm assuming, a taxi driver, maybe Gerald. That wasn't clear, but he was taken by somebody to a nearby brand new Fairfield Inn hotel on Cracker Barrel Lane in Knoxville. The driver said that Blair was acting weird and that his mind didn't seem to be functioning correctly, but he didn't appear to be on drugs. So when Blair gets to the Fairfield Inn, CCTV captures him. He enters and exits the lobby 5 or 6 times within about a 40-minute period. He's just going in, out, like outside loiters a little bit, inside loiters a little bit, in, out, in, out. And then finally he goes up to the counter and he purchases a room with $100 bill, so $100 cash. And the clerk is taking his money and is about to give him change and notices that Blair's leaving. He didn't wait for his change. He didn't go up to his room, nothing. He gave her $100, turned, left the lobby. That was it. On the morning of July 11th, the next morning, around 7:30 a.m., construction workers discovered Blair's body in a parking lot of another hotel near the Fairfield Inn that was under construction. So it was either being remodeled or built. He was naked from the waist down. His pants had been removed, and the lieutenant for major crime said it looked like somebody else pulled them down for him. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I really have no idea actually how it looks different. I mean, maybe they look like abruptly pulled off. I'm not sure. His shirt was wide open, and the rest of his clothes, his shoes and socks, were scattered around him. One of his shoes was under his head, kind of like a pillow. So they thought perhaps he was dying and he was uncomfortable and he like took one of his shoes and propped it up under his head. There were a lot of valuables around him. He had about $4,000 in German, Canadian, and US currency just scattered around him. Their police also located a black duffel bag nearby, which had maps and travel receipts. They also found a fanny pack, which had 5 troy ounces. I don't know what a troy ounce is, but apparently it's 160 grams of gold bars, gold and platinum coins. There was also jewelry, keys, and a pair of sunglasses. The keys was the key for his Toyota that he said he couldn't find or wouldn't look for. That was lying there. And his hotel room card was lying there. Apparently, the owner of one of the construction companies, the siding company that was working at the site, took a $100 bill and a $10 bill. But I don't know how, but authorities apparently later recovered that. So investigation starts pretty immediately. And first is the autopsy. So according to the University of Tennessee Medical Center's autopsy report, Blair had numerous cuts and abrasions. He had a wound on his forehead, possibly from a club or crowbar, they thought. It was a pretty deep wound. His hands were really bloodied, bruised, cut up from what they believe were defensive wounds, that he was defending himself. Big tufts of his hair had been pulled out. He had another cut that was very deep and almost black, like it was bruised, like he had been forcefully knocked to the pavement. And that had resulted in a cut that had then bruised. And he also suffered a severe blow that ruptured to his gut, that had ruptured his stomach, and his cause of death was septic shock from his stomach rupturing, which sounds like an extremely painful way to die, in addition to obviously being beat up pretty badly. There were, although not specified, there were injuries that indicated that he was potentially sexually assaulted, but there was also no DNA evidence confirming it. Sorry, I had to cough again. They found that in his stomach, he had lettuce, meat, and shrimp still in his stomach. So they believed that he had gone somewhere to eat after he left the hotel that night, but they couldn't determine where. He had no drugs or alcohol in his system. And upon further investigating into Blair, they found that he had never been diagnosed with a mental illness. There were no witnesses except for one kind of witness. There was a security guard at a nearby building who said that he heard a scream around 3:30 a.m. on that morning of July 11th, but he said it was a woman's scream. And the only physical DNA evidence found at the scene was there was one strand of long hair that was gripped in Blair's hand. And they do believe that this belonged to the attacker, but they there was no they had nothing to compare it to. That there was nothing, no match in any system. And the systems were in 1996 far less advanced than they are now, obviously. Authorities did test pieces of rebar from the construction site, but they were actually never able to find a murder weapon. So, as part of their investigation, they called Gerald Sapp, that interstate repair service driver, and told him that Blair had died. Said, you helped this guy, apparently. I'm not sure how they found him. There must have been some type of receipt or something. And then they brought him in for questioning and took hair samples from him. And this was so upsetting to Gerald Sapp that he ended up leaving his job. He said, police didn't necessarily accuse me, but I felt like I was under suspicion for killing somebody. And that wasn't anywhere I needed to be. All right, guys, my cough gets bad at night. They also spoke to the hotel clerk. And she said he was just very nervous, agitated, expecting someone to come in on him, even though there wasn't anybody there. I don't know who he was looking for, but he was waiting for somebody to walk in for him. Oh, I feel like I'm going to cough again. I'm sorry. I know that's distracting. I just want to I want to get to the end of this before I lose it with all the coughing. So that was about the extent of the investigation. There was not a lot of evidence. There was no DNA except for that hair. So there wasn't much to go on. So at this point, there's just a whole lot of theories and speculation. And, a robbery gone wrong, of course, was something, but no, that was pretty quickly ruled out because there's over $4,000 on the ground around him. Drugs, but he didn't have any drugs in his system. He didn't have any drugs in his belongings. That wouldn't make sense. A mental health crisis was certainly something that was considered because his behavior was quite erratic, paranoid, sudden travel. None of it really made sense. But again, he had never been diagnosed with anything, but he could have been suffering from some type of psychological breakdown or an undiagnosed mental illness. The most likely, they thought, was that it was a sex-related crime, because he was, pretty almost entirely nude when they found him, and the truck stop near where his body was found was a known location for prostitution. So one of the sheriffs said Blair could have started the act and never did it and got rolled. Or maybe if it was a female prostitute, maybe she had a pimp that was close by and they were going to roll this guy and they got scared and didn't. So I'm assuming by that he means they were going to rob him, but they didn't. Why beat him up and essentially, and murder him? Maybe they didn't know they murdered him at the time and then not take any of his cash. This sheriff investigator also said that he thought the sex act could have been committed in a vehicle. And when a struggle began, the killer maybe hit Blair in the head, threw him out on the road, and hit him with his car, which would have explained the fatal blow to his stomach if he had been kind of hit with the car's front bumper. Another detective disagrees with this. He says he thinks that the blow was like a kick. Somebody kicked him in the stomach. But if it was from a vehicle, that would explain he had apparently a pretty blackened hand. And this investigator said he caught the pavement. If you've ever wrecked a motorcycle, how the rocks or pavement will eat you up, one of his hands looked like that. So that he was maybe thrown out of a vehicle. And that's why his hand looked like that. Blair's mom had a phone interview with a news outlet. I don't know. I don't have the name of the specific outlet because now it's been, it's been copied and printed a lot of places. Um, but she said that he had been in a romantic relationship with a male roommate. Um, she said, quote, they acted a little strangely and giggled a lot, and it was kind of odd, but then he went back to a heterosexual relationship after that. She also claimed that Blair traveled to the South, like he was going to Knoxville to attend the 1996 Summer Olympic Games in Atlanta. She never said this to authorities. Obviously, authorities talked to her multiple times. Those Olympic Games in 1986 were beginning on July 19th, um, which was only 8 days after his body was discovered more than 200 miles away. Um, she never explained why she never told police this. But she did say to them, this was the whole point of the trip. And then she hung up the phone. The media outlet tried to call back at the house and made several calls to her home, but they were all answered by her husband, Blair's stepdad, who eventually got really angry and called the chances of solving the case remote as hell. And he said, we're not going to open that can of worms again, and then stopped answering the phone. So despite the investigation, despite, kind of going down every trail they could, his death still to this day remains unsolved. And it baffles authorities. The cold case unit investigator, Debbie White, she was also an FBI agent. She said, any lead, however big or small, can be relevant because that's the only way we're going to get anywhere in this case is by somebody coming forward with information. Another investigator on this case said it's the most interesting and the strangest that he's ever seen in his 38-year career. And it's been a pipe dream for decades to solve it. He said, if I could have one wish, somewhere in a damn mayonnaise jar, I could find a note that tells me what happened just so I'd know. I'm not sure why a mayonnaise jar, but. And then if anyone has any information regarding the case, please contact the Knox County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit at 865-215-3520 or email coldcase@knoxsheriff.org. And I will include that in the show notes. So a bit of a short episode and a very, there's not much more though. There's just nothing else out there. It's just absolutely, ooh, that was Henry. He's ready for dinner. So a pretty crazy story. And as you can hear, Mark, I believe, just arrived for a big kebab off. So I will leave it at that. And I hope you enjoyed this story. It would be, this is a peculiar one. So I feel like after so long, probably this isn't going to be solved because, people involved could be long gone at this point, but you never know. So that is our mini crime story for today. Thank you for listening. All the things. It really helps if you leave a review on Apple, good, bad, and different. Just leaving a review helps. Comments on Spotify that you can leave now. Follow us on YouTube or try our Patreon out. And that's it. Thank you guys. I love you so much. And I will be back next week. Okay, bye.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, good night and good luck.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, "Good night and good luck."